The boy was selling newspapers outside the Rideau Center when Vincent Hale first saw him. It wasn't the cold that caught Vincent's attention. Ottawa in November was always cold, the kind that got into your coat before you'd even buttoned it up. It wasn't the boy's size either, though he couldn't have been more than 11, maybe 12, thin in the way that came from not enough rather than from growing. What stopped Vincent, mid-stride on his way to the parking garage, was the song. The boy was humming, not loudly, not performing, just humming under his breath the way someone does when they don't know anyone is listening, a soft, wandering melody that had no business being in the mouth of a child selling papers on a Tuesday morning. Vincent had heard that melody exactly once before in his life. 15 years ago, in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and grief, while his wife held a baby they would never bring home. He stood there on the sidewalk, briefcase in hand, and felt something crack open in his chest. The boy looked up, dark eyes, serious for his age, a red toque pulled down over his ears. He held up a paper without a word, like he'd already decided Vincent wasn't the kind of man who made eye contact. "Where did you learn that?" Vincent asked. The boy blinked. "Learn what?" "That song. What you were humming." Something shifted in the boy's expression. Not fear exactly, but a careful kind of stillness. "I don't know," he said. "I've just always known it." Vincent bought the paper he didn't need, walked to his car, and sat in the dark of the parkade for a long time before he could make himself drive. His name was Vincent Hale, and by most measures, he had built a life that looked like success. He was 51 years old, the founder of Hale Infrastructure Partners, a firm that had financed half the major transit projects in eastern Ontario over the past 2 decades. He had a house in Rockcliffe Park with more rooms than he used. He had a housekeeper named Mrs. Dunbar who left casseroles in the fridge on Fridays. He had a daughter, Isabel, who was 23 and lived in Vancouver and called him on his birthday and at Christmas with the strained cheerfulness of someone keeping a promise they didn't fully believe in anymore. What he did not have, what he had not had in 15 years, was the thing that would have made the rest of it feel like something other than scaffolding. His wife's name had been Rosalind. She had died 11 days after their son was born, a complication no one had fully predicted, the kind of thing that happened in the statistics and not to people you knew until it did. The baby had lived for 4 days. Vincent had held him twice. He had named him James, after Rosalind's father, and he had buried them both in the same month, and he had gone back to work 6 weeks later because the alternative was something he could not look at directly. Isabel was from his first marriage, which had ended before Rosalind, quietly and without malice. She had been 7 when he met Rosalind, 11 when Rosalind died, and by the time she was 15, she had developed the self-sufficiency of a child who had learned not to need things that weren't reliably there. Vincent understood this. He did not know how to fix it. He did not know on that November morning that fixing things had nothing to do with what was coming. The boy's name was Elliot Marsh, not Elliot from anywhere in particular. He'd been in 3 foster placements since he was 8, and before that there were years he didn't talk about, in a house on Gladstone Avenue that the Children's Aid had eventually decided wasn't a house at all. He was 11 years and 4 months old, and he was currently living with a foster family in Vanier, a couple named the Donovans who were not unkind but who had 4 other children and a small house, and not a lot of time for the particular kind of quiet that Elliot carried around with him. He sold papers 3 mornings a week because the vendor, an older man named Frank, who had a bad hip and a good heart, paid him under the table and didn't ask questions. Elliot liked Frank. Frank talked about the senators and complained about the weather, and never once looked at Elliot like he was something that needed to be solved. Elliot had 2 things he'd kept from before the placements. A photograph so faded it was mostly impressions. A woman's hair, a window, light, and a melody he'd been humming for as long as he could remember. He didn't know where either of them came from. His caseworker had told him his mother was a woman named Claire, that she had struggled, that she had loved him, that sometimes love wasn't enough. Elliot had nodded and stored that information in the same place he stored most things, deep and quiet, away from the surface. He had not expected the man in the good coat to ask about the song. He thought about it all afternoon at school. He thought about it while Mrs. Kowalski explained long division and while Derek Tran ate his sandwich too loudly at the next desk over. There had been something in the man's face, Not pity, which Elliot could recognize at 100 meters, had built a whole immune system against, but something rawer than that. Something that looked, if Elliot had to name it, like recognition. That night he took out the photograph and looked at it for a long time. The woman in the photograph had dark eyes. Vincent went back the next Tuesday. He told himself he was going that way anyway. He told himself he'd left something at the office. He stood outside the Rideau Center at 7:15 in the morning with 2 coffees from the Tim Hortons across the street, 1 black and 1 hot chocolate, and waited. Elliot showed up at 7:30, unwinding a scarf from around his neck, already scanning the crowd for the regulars. He stopped when he saw Vincent. "You came back," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation delivered with the precision of a child who tracked patterns because patterns had historically mattered. "I did," Vincent said. He held out the hot chocolate. Elliot looked at it for a moment, then took it. "You're not supposed to accept things from strangers. That's good advice. I'm not following it right now." "No," Vincent agreed. "I noticed." They stood there in the cold, not quite comfortable and not quite uncomfortable, while the morning rush moved around them. Vincent was aware that this was an unusual situation, that a 51-year-old man bringing hot chocolate to a child selling newspapers could look like many things, and not all of them good. He was aware of this, and he stayed anyway because something in him had been pointed in this direction like a compass, and he did not yet know why, only that ignoring it was no longer possible. "The song," he said eventually. Elliot wrapped both hands around the cup. "What about it? I knew someone who used to hum it. A long time ago." Elliot was quiet for a moment, then, "Who? My wife?" Vincent looked at the street rather than the boy. "She died 15 years ago." Another silence. Elliot was the kind of child who understood that some information needed to be held carefully, not responded to immediately. "I'm sorry," he said at last, and meant it with a plainness that Vincent found, unexpectedly, easier to receive than the elaborate condolences of adults. "Where did you learn it?" Vincent asked again. "Really? I told you," Elliot said. "I don't know, I've just always known it. Like it was already in me when I got here." Vincent looked at him then, the dark eyes, the set of his jaw, something pulling at the edge of his understanding, a thread he was almost afraid to follow. "How old are you?" he asked. 11, Elliot said, almost 12. 15 years ago, James had lived 4 days. But Rosalind had been in that hospital for 6 weeks before. And before she met Vincent, before everything, there had been a year she had never fully explained, a year she said she had spent trying to find herself in the geography of bad decisions. She had never been specific. He had never pushed. They had been happy, and happiness had made him incurious, in ways he would later regret. He was aware that what he was thinking was almost certainly impossible. He was also aware that the boy was humming again very softly, without seeming to realize it, while he watched the crowd and sipped his hot chocolate. The same 6 notes. Always the same 6 notes. Vincent hired a private investigator named Donna Chung, who worked out of a narrow office on Elgin Street and had the unsentimental efficiency of someone who had spent 20 years finding things people had lost or hidden. He gave her what he had, Rosalind's name, the year she had called her missing year, the name of a city she had once mentioned in passing, Thunder Bay, and the fact that she had given birth in a hospital to a child she had not kept. He did not tell Donna about the song. Some things were too strange to survive being said out loud. Donna called him 3 weeks later. "There was a child," she said, without preamble. "Born in Thunder Bay, 2012. Mother listed as Rosalind Pryor, her name before she married you. The child was placed with the province within 48 hours of birth. She had documented postpartum complications, serious ones. The records say she intended to come back. The records also say she signed away rights 8 months later, when she was told he had been placed with a family and was stable, and that revisiting it would not serve anyone." Vincent was sitting at his kitchen table. Mrs. Dunbar had left a casserole. He had not eaten it. "She never told me," he said. "No," Donna said. "She didn't, does the child." He stopped. Started again. "Where is he now?" He already knew, some part of him had already known since the morning outside the Rideau Center, standing in the cold with 2 cups from Tim Hortons and a melody that had no business existing in the world twice. Donna gave him the name, Elliot Marsh. Placed with the Donovans in Vanier, currently in school, currently selling newspapers 3 mornings a week to a vendor named Frank on Rideau. Vincent sat in his kitchen for a long time after he hung up. He thought about Rosalind, about the year she never explained, about the fact that she had loved him completely, and still carried this one thing she could not bring herself to put down in front of him. A choice she had made in crisis, alone, very young, that she had probably replayed every day for the rest of her life. He did not feel angry. He was surprised not to feel angry. What he felt was something more like sorrow on her behalf, for the weight of it, for how long she had carried it without making a sound. And then he thought about Elliot. 11 years old, 3 foster placements, a melody in his chest that had been Rosalind's before it was his, passed down through blood and mystery, evidence of a connection neither of them had been told to look for. He picked up his phone and called his lawyer. It was not simple. Nothing about the process was simple, and Vincent had not expected it to be. There were hearings and assessments and home studies, and a guardian ad litem named Ms. Fournier, who asked him questions that were designed to uncover bad intentions, and who, by the end of the 3rd meeting, seemed to have concluded he didn't have any. There was a meeting with the Donovans, who were guarded at first, and then, once it was clear this was not a criticism of them, quietly relieved. They had always worried, they said, that Elliot didn't quite fit, not because of anything he did, but because of the way he held himself apart, like he was waiting for something he didn't have words for. There were conversations with Elliot himself. The first one was the hardest. Vincent had not been sure how to begin, and so he had simply told the truth, the way Rosalind had always told him. Truth was the only architecture that held. They were sitting in Miss Fournier's office, which had been designed to feel unofficially comfortable, and mostly succeeded. Elliot was in his good sweater, dark green, a little too big, the kind of thing someone had bought with the future in mind. He listened with his hands folded in his lap and his expression very still. When Vincent finished, Elliot didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "She thought of me. It wasn't a question, it was something else, something that needed to be true and was asking to be confirmed." "She thought of you," Vincent said. "I believe that very much. I think she thought of you every day." Elliot looked at his hands. "Okay," he said at last, quietly, not a verdict, more like something being set down after a long time of carrying it. The legal process took 7 months. Vincent's lawyer, a careful woman named Priya Samara, who had handled 2 previous adoptions and had the calm of someone who had navigated worse, told him repeatedly that this was fast, that the system moved like cold honey, and that things were going well. Vincent chose to believe her. During those 7 months, he drove to Vanier on Sunday afternoons, and he and Elliot walked along the river and ate poutine from a place Elliot liked on Montreal Road, and talked about the Senators, who were having an aggressively mediocre season. Elliot was, Vincent came to understand, one of those rare people, the age didn't matter, who said almost nothing and meant all of it. He was funny in a dry way that snuck up on you. He was good at noticing things. He had a particular gift for silence that was not emptiness but presence, the kind of quiet that made the people around him feel unexpectedly heard. Vincent's daughter Isabel came to visit in February. He had told her on the phone, carefully, piece by piece, about Rosalind's year, about what Donna had found, about the song, about Elliot, and she had listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her, and when he was done she had said, "Dad, are you doing okay?" in a voice he hadn't heard from her in years. She met Elliot on a Sunday in February at the river. She showed up in her Vancouver coat, which was not warm enough for Ottawa in February, and Elliot looked at her bare hands and said, without anything in his voice except statement of fact, "You should have gloves." Isabel blinked. Then she laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, and said, "You're right, I should." After that, they walked along the Rideau River together, Elliot explaining hockey statistics with the precision of someone who had researched this the way other people researched matters of life and death, and Isabel listening with an attention she had not given many things in a long time. Vincent walked slightly behind them and watched this happen, and felt something shift in his chest that he could not name, to say it felt like doors opening in a house he had thought was locked. The finalization was on a Thursday in June. Miss Fournier was there. Priya Samara was there. The judge, a man named Tremblay who had clearly done this before, and knew which moments required gravity and which ones didn't, had the papers ready on his bench when they arrived. Elliot wore his good sweater again. Vincent had offered to take him shopping, and Elliot had said, with characteristic economy, that he was fine, which meant he was nervous and wasn't saying so. When the judge asked Elliot if he understood what today meant, Elliot looked at him very seriously and said yes. "Do you want this?" the judge asked. Not a formality, a real question. "Yes," Elliot said. The judge signed the papers. Outside the courthouse, in the June sun that had finally arrived after a gray and lingering spring, Elliot stood beside Vincent on the steps and squinted into the light. There was a food truck across the street, pigeons on the railing, a woman walking a dog the size of a small ottoman. "So," Elliot said. "So," Vincent said. Elliot was quiet for a moment. Then, "Isabel said she'd video call tonight." "She will," Vincent said. "She's very punctual." "I know," she told me. A pause. "She also said you cry at movies. That is a vicious slander." She said specifically, the end of Up. Vincent looked at the sky. "That is a deeply manipulative film designed to exploit human emotion." For the first time in all the months Vincent had known him, Elliot smiled a full smile, not the small controlled version he kept for everyday use, but the real one, the one that changed his whole face. "Yeah," he said. "She said you'd say that too." Vincent looked at the boy standing in the sun, his son. He thought about Rosalind, about the song she'd given this child before she even knew she was giving it, tucked into him like a letter, written without paper, carried 11 years across the distance between who she had been and who she had become. Arriving finally here on the steps of an Ottawa courthouse on a Thursday in June. He thought, she would have loved this. He thought she does. "Hungry," he said. Elliot glanced at the food truck. "Yeah." They walked down the steps together into the ordinary and extraordinary afternoon, and somewhere in the back of Vincent's mind, very quietly, like something remembered rather than heard, 6 notes played on.